He thought he had taken everything, the house, the savings, even my name, but he missed the one thing my father had hidden for me, a place that held a truth that would shatter the story he'd built and give me back my own. If you've ever felt like you've lost it all and had to start over from absolute zero, subscribe to this channel, because this story is for you. The air in Mr. Henderson's office was the color of weak tea and smelled of old paper and quiet defeat. It was the kind of room where futures were unwritten, erased line by painful line. I sat across from him, a large mahogany desk separating us like a barricade. On its polished surface lay the final stack of documents, a pristine white tombstone marking the death of my marriage. My hand, holding the pen, felt disconnected from my body, a strange appendage acting on someone else's orders. The scratch of the nib was the only sound, each signature a small sharp surrender. Ilara Vance. Ilara Vance, over and over until the name felt foreign, a label for a person I no longer recognized. My former name, the one I had shared with Marcus for a decade, was now a legal phantom, scrubbed from my identity. "That's the last of it then," Mr. Henderson said, his voice a low, gravelly thing that didn't offer comfort so much as acknowledge its absence. He was a man built of straight lines and muted colors, from his gray suit to his neatly combed, thinning hair. He gathered the papers with an efficiency that bordered on ritual, stacking them into a neat pile that represented the complete dismantling of my life. The condo in the city with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a life I no longer lived. The joint savings account now drained. The art, the furniture, the car. All of it was Marcus's now, a spoil of a war I hadn't even known I was fighting until the final battle was already lost. He slid a small cardboard box across the desk. It was bigger than a shoebox sealed with packing tape. "These are the personal effects from the safe deposit box. Your husband's solicitor dropped them off this morning." I looked at the box. It felt impossibly light. 10 years of a shared life, and this was what was left for me. A few childhood photographs Marcus had deemed worthless, my grandmother's tarnished silver locket, and a handful of letters from my father, who had died 2 years before the wedding. I didn't need to open it to know its contents. These were the sentimental scraps, the things without monetary value, the pieces of my past that Marcus had no use for. He had been meticulous in his victory, ensuring he controlled not just the present assets, but the narrative of our past, leaving me with only the ghosts. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, pulling my attention from the pathetic little box. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a large manila envelope thick with legal-sized papers and a single, ornate iron key. The key was heavy, old, and rusted in the grooves of its intricate design. It looked like something from a fairy tale, or more accurately, a horror story. "There is one other thing," he said, pushing the envelope and the key toward me. "An asset." It was overlooked by Mr. Thorne's legal team. A flicker of something, not hope, it was too weak for that, stirred in my chest. An asset? Marcus's lawyers had been sharks, stripping every last cent, every last possession. They had combed through my finances with a terrifying thoroughness. How could they have missed anything? "It's a property," Mr. Henderson continued, his expression unchanged. He was managing my expectations before I could even form them. "Registered under your maiden name, Ilara Blackwood. The transfer was filed over 15 years ago, a gift from your father. It's called Blackwood Dairy, up in Oakhaven County." The name meant almost nothing to me. A faint, blurry memory surfaced, a long car ride with my dad, the smell of hay and rain, a big red barn with a sagging roof. I must have been 7 or 8. A place he'd bought on a whim, he'd said. One of his projects. My father had been a man of quiet, often inexplicable projects. He was a high school geology teacher, not a farmer. We'd visited it once, maybe twice, before he'd declared the soil too stubborn and the commute too long, and it had faded from our family conversation, becoming just another forgotten story. "It's listed on the county tax rolls as derelict," Mr. Henderson said, his words a steady deflating drone. "The land is zoned agricultural, but the assessment values it at next to nothing. The farmhouse is likely uninhabitable. The barn is probably collapsing. According to the notes, it's been vacant for at least 2 decades. Thorne's team likely saw the valuation and dismissed it as a liability, not an asset. The cost of demolition would outweigh the land value." He paused, letting the reality settle in. "I'm sorry, Ilara, it's not a windfall, it's probably just another burden. But it is, legally and unequivocally, yours." He tapped the envelope. "This is the original deed, the title is clear, and this," he nudged the heavy iron key, "was filed with it. It should open the front door. If it's still standing." I stared at the key. It felt cold and heavy in my palm. A solid piece of a past I barely remembered. A derelict dairy, a collapsing barn, an uninhabitable farmhouse. It wasn't a rescue, it was a joke. A final cosmic punchline to the long, cruel story of my divorce. Marcus got the gleaming city penthouse, and I got a pile of rotten wood in the middle of nowhere. It was so perfectly, brutally unfair that a small, dry laugh escaped my lips. It was a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the quiet office. Mr. Henderson offered a small, sympathetic frown. You could try to sell the land to a neighboring farm. You might get a few thousand for it. Enough for a security deposit on a small apartment. Perhaps. I picked up the key, its weight a strange comfort. It was something to hold on to, something real. Marcus had taken everything that was ours, but he hadn't touched this because it was never ours, it was mine. A gift from my father, a man who had loved me without condition, a man Marcus had subtly, skillfully taught me to see as simple, unambitious, and out of touch with the world he wanted us to conquer. Your father is a good man, Alara, he used to say, with a tone that implied, but he doesn't understand what it takes to be successful. And like a fool, I had started to believe him. No, I said, the word feeling surprisingly firm in my own ears. I'm not going to sell it. I didn't know why I said it. The thought had formed and spoken itself before I could properly examine it. Maybe it was just defiance. Maybe it was the only thing in the world I had left to say no to. I stood up, my legs shaky. I took the box of my ghosts, the envelope with the deed, and the heavy iron key. I didn't look back at Mr. Henderson as I walked out of his office, out of the sterile building, and into the cold, indifferent city air. I had no money, no home, no job, and no plan. All I had was a deed to a ruin and a key to a door that might not exist anymore. It wasn't much, but as I stood on the crowded sidewalk, invisible to the rushing anonymous faces, I realized it was a destination, and for the first time in a year I had somewhere to go. The bus station was a purgatory of stale coffee and disinfectant. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my small box of belongings at my feet, the envelope with the deed clutched in my lap like a shield. The ticket to Oakhaven had taken nearly the last of the cash I had on me. I watched people come and go, families greeting each other with tearful hugs, couples kissing goodbye, students with backpacks heading off on adventures. I was none of them. I was a refugee, fleeing the wreckage of my own life, with no one to see me off and no one waiting at the other end. The journey north was a slow, gray crawl away from the life I had known. The bus windows were smeared with rain, blurring the city skyline into a smudge of concrete and glass. I watched it recede until it was nothing more than a memory, a place where I had once been happy, or had at least convinced myself I was. Marcus had loved the city. He thrived on its energy, its noise, its relentless ambition. He called it the center of the universe. He had a way of saying things that, with a casual certainty that made you feel foolish for ever thinking otherwise. He had reshaped my world with his words, convincing me that my quiet preferences for open spaces and slower days were a sign of weakness, a lack of drive. He had been so charming, so magnetic when we first met. He was a rising star at a corporate development firm, a man who could command a room with a smile and a well-timed story. I was working at a small art gallery, quiet and I suppose easily impressed. He made me feel seen, special. He said he loved my grounded nature, that it was a refreshing contrast to his high-stakes world. It was only later I realized he didn't see it as grounded, he saw it as pliable, something he could mold. The divorce proceedings had been a masterclass in his particular brand of cruelty. He never raised his voice. He simply, methodically, used my own words, my own insecurities against me. The prenuptial agreement I'd signed without much thought at his gentle urging was an iron cage. He argued that I had contributed nothing of financial value to the marriage, that my emotional support wasn't a tangible asset. His lawyers painted me as a freeloader, a naive woman who had coasted on his success, and in the sterile impersonal language of the law, they were right. I had quit my job at the gallery to manage our home, to host his business dinners, to be the perfect corporate wife he required. I had made his life seamless, and in doing so, I had erased myself, as the cityscape gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to patchy forests and rolling farmland. The tightness in my chest began to ease, just a fraction. The world outside the window was turning green and brown, the colors of the earth. The sky was a vast, unbroken expanse of gray, and the rain fell with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. It felt cleansing. I thought about my father. He would have hated the life I'd been living. He was a man who found more wonder in a piece of quartz than in a stock portfolio. He'd tried to warn me about Marcus in his own quiet way. He never said he disliked him. He would just ask gentle, probing questions. Does he make you laugh, Ellie? Does he listen when you talk about your day? Do you feel like yourself when you're with him? Questions I had brushed aside, blinded by the dazzling future Marcus had promised. My dad saw the hollowness behind the charm, but he knew I wouldn't listen. I had to learn on my own. Maybe the dairy wasn't a whim, maybe it was a message in a bottle he'd thrown into the ocean of my future, hoping one day I might wash ashore and find it. The bus pulled into Oakhaven just as dusk was settling, bleeding purple and gray into the wet sky. The town was little more than a single main street with a handful of storefronts, a grocery, a hardware store, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a town hall that looked like it had been built a century ago and hadn't been painted since. It was the kind of place Marcus would have driven through with the windows up and a look of disdain on his face. It was quiet. The air smelled of wet asphalt and wood smoke. I got off the bus, the only passenger to do so. The driver gave me a curious look as he handed me my single suitcase. I found the town's only taxi, a beat-up sedan idling by the curb. The driver was an older man with a weathered face and a kind smile. "Where to?" he asked. "Blackwood Dairy," I said, my voice feeling small. His smile faltered for a second, replaced by a look of gentle pity. "The old Blackwood place, out on Ridge Road? Haven't been anyone out there in years. You sure about that?" "I'm sure," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The ride was mostly silent. We left the small glow of the town behind and plunged into a darkness that was absolute. Broken only by the sweep of the headlights over wet, empty roads, the rain had softened to a fine mist. We turned onto a gravel road, and the car bumped and jostled. Finally, the driver slowed and pointed. "This is it." Through the misty darkness, I could just make out a rusted, wrought iron gate half swallowed by overgrown vines. One of the hinges was broken, causing it to sag drunkenly. Beyond it, a long, dark lane disappeared into a tunnel of looming trees. It looked like the entrance to a forgotten world. "This is as far as I can go," the driver said. "Lane's all washed out up ahead." I paid him, my hand trembling slightly as I counted out the bills. He hesitated before driving away. "You got a place to stay tonight, miss? The motel back in town is clean enough." "I'll be fine," I lied. "Thank you." He gave me one last worried look and then drove off, his red taillights shrinking into the darkness until they vanished. Leaving me utterly alone in the oppressive silence, I stood before the sagging gate, my suitcase in one hand, the cold iron key in the other. The only sounds were the dripping of water from the trees and the frantic beating of my own heart. This was it, my inheritance, my sanctuary, my ruin. I pushed the gate. It groaned in protest, a long, mournful sound in the night, and swung open just wide enough for me to slip through. The lane was worse than the driver had said. It was a muddy track, more creek bed than road, and I stumbled my way along it, dragging my suitcase through the ruts. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dense, dark canopy that blocked out what little light remained in the sky. It was a 10-minute walk that felt like an hour. Every rustle in the undergrowth sent a jolt of fear through me. I was a city person, accustomed to the predictable sounds of traffic and sirens. This deep organic silence was terrifying. It felt alive, watchful. Finally, the trees thinned and I stepped into a clearing, and there it was. The farmhouse was a dark silhouette against the bruised purple sky, its roofline sagging in the middle like a broken spine. A couple of windows were boarded up, others were dark, vacant eyes. To its right stood the barn, a massive, hulking shape that seemed to absorb the darkness around it. The paint on both buildings had long since peeled away, leaving the wood a weathered, ghostly gray. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of damp earth and rotting leaves, but underneath it something else, the faint, sweet scent of old hay and rain-soaked cedar. I picked my way across the overgrown yard, my shoes sinking into the soft ground. The porch steps groaned under my weight, and I tested each one before putting my full trust in it. I reached the front door. The wood was swollen and splintered, the paint a distant memory. The keyhole was dark and forbidding. For a moment, I was paralyzed by a new fear. What if the key didn't work? What if this last pathetic piece of my old life was just as useless as everything else? My hand was shaking as I pushed the key into the lock. It met resistance, a grinding of rust and settled grit. I pushed harder, wiggling it back and forth. It felt futile. I was about to give up, to slump down on the rotting porch and finally let the tears come, when I heard a faint click. I turned the key with both hands, putting all my weight into it. There was a loud, protesting groan from deep within the door, a series of clunks and scrapes as the old bolt, frozen for decades, reluctantly began to move, and then it gave way. I pushed the door. It scraped against the warped floorboards, opening just enough for me to squeeze through. The air that rushed out was cold and musty, a smell of trapped time. I stepped inside into the absolute pitch-black dark of the house. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold, and turned on its flashlight. The narrow beam cut a small, nervous circle in the immense darkness. It illuminated a hallway, A thick layer of dust, as fine and gray as volcanic ash, covered everything. The floorboards, the walls, a small side table draped in a white sheet. To my left, a staircase ascended into the upper darkness. To my right, a doorway led into what I assumed was a living room, where more sheet-draped shapes huddled like a congregation of ghosts. Cobwebs, thick as cotton candy, hung in every corner, glistening in the beam of my light. The silence in here was different from the silence outside. It was heavier, suffocating. It was the silence of abandonment. I moved slowly, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the dusty floor. I dragged my suitcase inside and closed the door, the sound of it shutting echoing through the empty house. I was in. I was home. The thought was so absurd I almost laughed again. I spent the next hour exploring the ground floor, my phone's light my only guide. The living room held a sofa and 2 armchairs, all under sheets. A stone fireplace stood cold and empty, a gaping black mouth on the far wall. The dining room had a large table, its surface invisible beneath its shroud. The kitchen was a relic from another era. A huge enamel sink, a rusted wood-burning stove, and bare wooden cupboards. In one of them, I found a single dusty mason jar, nothing else. Finally, I found what felt like a study. A small room at the back of the house with a large wooden desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, all empty. A single, high-backed leather chair faced the desk. Unlike the other rooms, the furniture here wasn't covered. It was as if the owner had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. The desk was clear, save for a tarnished brass lamp and a small, locked metal box on the mantelpiece above the unlit fireplace. It was an old cash box, the kind you'd see at a flea market. It was plain, black, and dented at one corner. It wasn't the promise of money that drew me to it, but the simple fact that it was locked. It was a secret in a house full of them. I picked it up. It was light. I shook it, but heard nothing rattle inside. I ran my fingers over the lock, but there was no keyhole, just a simple clasp that required a key I didn't have. I set the box on the dusty desk and shone my light around the room. Searching for a key, for anything, there was nothing. Just dust and emptiness. Frustration began to bubble up inside me. Hot and sharp, I was tired, cold, and emotionally exhausted. This whole trip was a fool's errand, a desperate grasp at a non-existent straw. This house wasn't a sanctuary. It was a tomb. Driven by a sudden reckless anger, I looked around for something to pry the box open. I found an old heavy letter opener on the desk, its handle shaped like a feather. It was probably useless, but it was something. I wedged the tip into the seam of the box and pushed. The metal bent. I pushed harder, gritting my teeth, channeling all the frustration and grief of the last year into that single point of pressure. The metal groaned, scraped, and then, with a sudden pop, the lid sprang open. I shone my light inside, my heart pounding. There was no money, no jewelry. There was only a single thick envelope made of heavy cream-colored paper. It was sealed with a wax stamp of a simple oak leaf, and on the front, in my father's familiar, elegant script, was my name, Ilara. My breath caught in my throat. My anger vanished, replaced by a wave of awe and a deep, aching sadness. He had left this for me. He had known somehow that one day I would be here in this room and I would find it. I sat down in the cold leather chair, the chair he must have sat in, and carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter, several pages long, the paper still crisp. The date at the top was from just a few months before he died. I unfolded it, my hands trembling, and began to read the words my father had left for me to find. "My dearest Ilara," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means that things have not gone the way I hoped they would for you. It means you have found your way here, to this old, forgotten place. And for that I am both deeply sorry and profoundly proud. I know you must be feeling lost. I want you to know you are not. You are exactly where you need to be." Tears pricked my eyes, blurring the ink. I wiped them away impatiently and kept reading. "I imagine you have many questions about this place. I told you I bought it as a project, a whim. That was not the truth. I bought this dairy and put it in your name the week after you announced your engagement to Marcus. Please do not be angry. Try to understand. A father sees things a daughter in love cannot. I saw the way he looked at you, not with adoration, but with a kind of appraisal. I saw the way he subtly corrected you in conversation, the way he dismissed your opinions with a charming smile. I saw a man who didn't want a partner. He wanted an acquisition. To tell you this then would have been to lose you. You would have defended him, and he would have used it to drive a wedge between us. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I built you a lifeboat. I had to stop reading, a sob catching in my throat. A lifeboat. He had seen it all right from the very beginning. The subtle manipulations, the slow erosion of my confidence. I had thought I was hiding it so well, even from myself, but he had seen. This place is more than just a broken-down farm, Ellie. It is a secret, and it is a weapon, but you will have to be strong to wield it. I know you are. You have a resilience you don't even recognize in yourself. You have my strength and your mother's fire. You have just forgotten how to use it. This place will help you remember. The answers you need are not all in this letter. The rest of the story is hidden in the barn. Go to the old milking parlor. Find stall number 7. Your real inheritance is buried there. Be careful. And know always that I love you more than words can say. I am with you, always your dad. I folded the letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The silence of the house no longer felt menacing, it felt expectant. My father's presence was so strong in that room, it was as if he were sitting in the chair across from me. His kind eyes full of love and encouragement. He had left me a map out of the ruins and into a future I couldn't yet imagine. The initial shock gave way to a storm of emotions. Grief, sharp and overwhelming, for the father I still missed every single day. He had been my anchor, and without him I had drifted, allowing Marcus to become my entire world. Then came anger, a white-hot rage at Marcus for his calculated cruelty, for proving my father's worst fears true. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had tried to break my spirit, to isolate me and leave me with nothing and no one. And finally, beneath the grief and the anger, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout. My father had believed in me. He had trusted me to be strong enough to handle this, to follow his cryptic instructions. He had left me not just a place but a purpose. But with that hope came a paralyzing wave of fear and self-doubt. Could I really do this? The letter was cryptic, a weapon. Be careful. What had he gotten himself into? What had he left for me to face? The barn loomed in my mind, a place of shadows and secrets. It was one thing to read a letter in the relative safety of the house. It was another to go out into the dark, into that collapsing structure and dig into the unknown. For a long time, I just sat there in the dark. In my father's chair, the letter clutched in my hand. Part of me wanted to run, to take Mr. Henderson's advice, sell the land for whatever I could get and disappear, start a new, anonymous life somewhere far away from Marcus, from Oakhaven, from this house of ghosts and responsibilities. It would be the easy path, the safe path. No one would blame me. But my father's words echoed in my head. You have a resilience you don't even recognize in yourself, did I? I thought about the past year, the quiet humiliations in court, the condescending tone of Marcus's lawyers, the friends who had sided with him, who saw his success and my sudden poverty and drew their own conclusions. I had endured it all. I had bent, but I hadn't completely broken. Maybe my father was right. Maybe there was a strength in me I had forgotten. Listen, if you've ever been at a crossroads like this, where you have to choose between the easy path and a terrifying, uncertain one, I want you to hit that like button, because this is the moment everything changed. This is the moment I had to decide who I was going to be, the victim Marcus had created, or the daughter my father believed me to be. Now let's get back to the story. I stood up. The decision was made. I wasn't going to run. I owed it to my father to see this through. I owed it to myself. I searched the kitchen, my movements now filled with a sense of purpose. I found a box of old matches and a few stubby candles, their waxy scent filling the air as I lit them, casting a warm, flickering glow that pushed back the oppressive darkness. The house felt a little less like a tomb and a little more like a shelter. In a utility closet, I found what I was looking for, a heavy, rust-covered crowbar and a large, old-fashioned flashlight that, to my amazement, still worked when I clicked it on, its beam weak but steady. Armed with my tools, I took a deep breath and stepped back outside. The mist had thickened into a light drizzle, and the night was profoundly dark. The barn was an even more intimidating presence up close. It was enormous, far bigger than I remembered, its peaked roof disappearing into the black sky. A large section of the roof on the far side had caved in, leaving a gaping hole. The main doors were slightly ajar, hanging crookedly on their tracks. I pushed one of the heavy doors. It slid open with a deafening screech of rusted metal on metal that made me flinch. The air that poured out was thick and earthy, the smell of ancient hay, manure, and damp soil. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the cavernous space. The interior was cathedral-like in its scale. Massive wooden beams, as thick as tree trunks, crisscrossed high above in the darkness. Dust motes danced in my flashlight beam like tiny stars. To my left was the old milking parlor, a long row of rusted metal stanchions and concrete stalls. Pigeons cooed and fluttered in the high rafters, their movements sending down a soft rain of dust and debris. I made my way to the milking parlor, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the vast silence. The stalls were numbered with faded painted numerals, 1, 2, 3. I counted my way down the line, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 6-7. Stall number 7 was like all the others. A concrete floor, a rusted stanchion, a feed trough filled with dirt and cobwebs. My father's instructions had been specific, buried there. I shone the light on the concrete floor. It was solid, thick, unbroken. For a moment my heart sank. Had I misunderstood? Was this a wild goose chase? Then I remembered the house, the way things were hidden in plain sight. I ran my hand over the concrete, feeling for any inconsistency. Nothing. I tapped it with the crowbar. It made a solid, dull thud. I moved to the back of the stall near the wall. I tapped again. Thud, thud, thunk. The sound was different, less solid, more hollow. I knelt, excitement and fear warring within me. I scraped away the dirt and grime with the tip of the crowbar. Underneath I saw it, a faint, straight line, and then another, forming a perfect square about 3 feet by 3 feet. It was a section of the floor, cut and replaced. My father had hidden it well. Getting it open was brutal work. I jammed the tip of the crowbar into the seam and threw all my weight onto it. The concrete was heavy, sealed tight by years of grime and moisture. For 20 minutes I strained, my muscles screaming in protest, sweat dripping down my face despite the cold. The crowbar slipped, scraping my knuckles raw. I gritted my teeth and tried again and again, driven by the memory of my father's words. Finally, with a loud crack, a corner of the concrete slab lifted a few inches. A puff of stale, musty air escaped from the darkness below. I worked the crowbar around the edges, slowly, painstakingly, lifting the heavy slab until I could slide it aside. I shone my flashlight into the hole. It wasn't a deep pit, but a small, dry cellar, lined with stone, and sitting in the middle of it was a large, military green, waterproof metal footlocker. It took all my strength to haul it out of the hole. It was incredibly heavy. I dragged it out of the stall and onto the main floor of the barn. It had 2 heavy-duty latches on the front. They weren't locked. My hands were trembling so much I could barely unhook them. I lifted the lid. I don't know what I was expecting. Gold bars? Family jewels? The reality was both more mundane and infinitely more shocking. The top layer was filled with bundles of cash, $100 bills, wrapped in paper bands. There must have been tens of thousands of dollars. Enough to live on for a year, maybe more. Enough to start over. But that wasn't the most important thing. Beneath the cash was a carefully organized collection of documents in waterproof sleeves. I pulled one out. It was a detailed geological survey map of the property and the surrounding area. It was covered in my father's precise, neat annotations. Another file contained a series of water purity reports from a state-certified lab, all dating back over the last decade. The results were astounding. The water was exceptionally pure, almost completely free of contaminants. And then I found the main file. It was a thick sheaf of legal documents, deeds, and historical records. They established, beyond any doubt, that the original 1888 deed for the Blackwood Dairy included something called sole and perpetual subterranean water rights. It was an archaic clause, the kind modern deeds no longer included, but according to the attached legal opinion my father had commissioned, it was ironclad. Tucked at the very bottom, beneath everything else, was another cream-colored envelope, identical to the first. I opened it with a growing sense of dread and wonder. "Ilara," this letter began, "if you found this, you found the heart of the matter. The money is for you, to give you a foundation. But the documents are your power. I didn't just stumble upon this place, Ellie. I'm a geologist, remember? I spent years studying aquifer maps of this region. This farm, this worthless piece of land, sits atop the Oak Haven Aquifer, one of the largest and purest untapped natural springs in the state. The water is a river of gold flowing right under your feet. And because of that old, forgotten clause in the deed, you don't just own the land. You own the water, all of it. A few years before I bought the property, a major development corporation, a subsidiary of a company called Apex Global, started quietly buying up land all around here. They know about the aquifer. Their plan is to build a massive water bottling plant and sell Oak Haven's water to the world. But they can't. Not without the primary access point and the primary water rights. Not without this farm. I bought it to stop them, to protect this place from them. They've tried to buy it from me a dozen times over the years, making lowball offers, trying to intimidate me. I always refused. Now for the part that will be hardest to hear. The lead counsel for Apex Global's acquisition division is a man named Marcus Thorne. I discovered this about a year after you started dating him. I don't believe he met you by accident, Ellie. I believe he was sent to get what his company couldn't. He couldn't get the farm through business, so he tried to get it through marriage. The divorce, the way he stripped you of everything, it wasn't just greed. It was a strategy. He thinks that by leaving you destitute, he can force you to sell this last remaining asset to him for pennies on the dollar. He thinks you're beaten. He thinks you're weak. I need you to prove him wrong. I dropped the letter, my body going cold. It all clicked into place. The whole decade, our entire life together. It had been a lie, a long, patient corporate scheme. My marriage had been a hostile takeover. Marcus hadn't loved me. He had targeted me. He had used me. The realization was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to lean against the wall of the stall. He hadn't just deceived me, he had erased me, turning me into a pawn in a game I never even knew I was playing. I sat there for what felt like hours in the cold dust of a barn. The evidence of his betrayal spread out at my feet. The world had tilted on its axis. Every shared memory was now tainted. Every loving word he'd ever spoken now sounded like a line from a script. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on me, threatening to crush me. But then slowly, something else began to rise through the grief. It was the anger from before, but it was different now. It was cold, clear, and sharp as glass. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated my father. He thought he had left me with a ruin, but my father had left me with an arsenal. My phone, which I had placed on top of the footlocker, suddenly buzzed, the sound violent in the silence. I picked it up. The screen showed an unknown number. On instinct, I answered. "Elara Vance?" a smooth, professional voice asked. "This is she. My name is Jonathan Keene. I represent a client who is interested in acquiring a derelict property you've just inherited in Oak Haven County, the old Blackwood Dairy. I know it's not much, but my client is prepared to offer you $20,000 to take it off your hands. It would be a quick, clean cash sale, a chance for you to get a fresh start." The timing was too perfect. They must have been tracking the estate transfer. They were moving in for the kill, just as my father predicted. $20,000. It was an insult. It was also, an hour ago, more money than I could have dreamed of. He was preying on my desperation. I thought of Marcus, of his smug, handsome face, of the years he had stolen from me. I thought of my father, of his quiet love and fierce protection. I looked at the documents, I looked at the cash, and I felt the last of the fear and doubt burn away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated steel. "The property is not for sale," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the water beneath my feet. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Vance, perhaps you don't understand your situation." "Oh, I think for the first time in a very long time, I understand my situation perfectly," I interrupted. "Do not contact me again." I hung up the phone. I sat in the darkness, the silence of the barn no longer a threat but a comfort. It was my fortress. My father hadn't just left me a lifeboat. He had left me a battleship, and I was finally ready to take the helm. The next morning I woke up on a pile of old blankets in the study, the first rays of dawn filtering through the dusty windows. The house looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more sad. It wasn't a ruin. It was a place that had been waiting for someone to come home. I spent the day taking stock. I consolidated the cash and the documents back into the footlocker, which I hid again, this time in a more secure place. I walked the property, truly seeing it for the first time. The fields were overgrown with wildflowers and tall grass, but the soil was dark and rich. The woods behind the barn were deep and old, full of towering oak and maple trees. I found the spring itself, a small, crystal-clear pool hidden in a grove of birch trees, the water bubbling up from the earth. It felt sacred. This land wasn't just a legal asset. It was beautiful. It was alive. My father hadn't just saved it from a corporation. He had preserved it. I realized I had a dual purpose now, to fight Marcus and his employers and to protect this place, to bring it back to life. My first call was to Mr. Henderson, I explained, in broad strokes what I had found. Not everything. I knew I needed to be careful, but enough. I told him about the water rights and the immediate offer from the development company. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "My God," he finally said, the professional detachment in his voice replaced by genuine shock. "Elara, your father was a remarkable man." "Yes, he was," I said. "I need a new lawyer, Mr. Henderson, not a divorce lawyer. I need an environmental lawyer, the best one you can find. Someone who isn't afraid of a fight with a company like Apex Global." He promised to make some calls. My next trip was into town. I walked the 2 miles down the muddy lane, but this time it didn't feel intimidating. It felt like my own. Oak Haven in the daylight was charmingly worn around the edges. I went into the general store to buy supplies, food, cleaning products, work gloves. The woman behind the counter, a kindly-looking lady named Martha, gave me a curious but friendly smile. "You're the one who moved into the old Blackwood place," she said. It wasn't a question. "Heard you came in on the bus last night." Glad to see some life out there again. Your father was a good man. Used to come in here every summer, just for a week or so. Said he was checking on his investment. We all thought he was crazy. She chuckled. Guess he knew something we didn't. Her words were a comfort. My father hadn't abandoned this place. He had been its quiet guardian. As I was leaving, an old farmer in overalls who had been listening spoke up. That lane of yours is a mess. I can come by with my tractor and grade it for you tomorrow if you like. Can't have you getting stuck out there. I was so taken aback by the unsolicited kindness that I could only stammer my thanks. He just nodded, a small smile on his weathered face. Folks round here look after their own. I walked back to the farm with a lighter step. I wasn't alone in this. I had my father's legacy, and I had the tentative beginnings of a community. The weeks that followed were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I hired a top environmental law firm from the city, funded by my father's seed money. They were stunned by the strength of my legal position. Apex Global's lawyers sent a series of increasingly threatening letters, followed by increasingly generous offers. I refused them all. My lawyer filed a countersuit, seeking an injunction to prevent any drilling or development on the surrounding properties, citing the potential environmental impact on my aquifer. The battle had begun, but while the lawyers fought in the city, I fought my own battle at the farm. I worked from sunup to sundown. I scrubbed the farmhouse from top to bottom. I aired out the musty rooms, washed the sheets that had covered the furniture for years, and polished the old wood until it gleamed. I repaired the porch steps and replaced the broken window panes. The farmer, true to his word, cleared the lane. Martha from the store started dropping off a local paper for me once a week. Slowly, painstakingly, the house started to feel like a home. My home. I didn't touch the barn. It was too big a project for now. It stood as a silent reminder of the secret it had held, the place where my new life had truly begun. One evening, sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors, I thought about the meaning of inheritance. Marcus had tried to leave me with nothing to erase my value, but my father had left me something far more precious than money. He had left me the truth. He had left me a purpose. He had left me a place where I could rediscover my own strength. Home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's the ground beneath your feet that no one can take away. It's a promise kept across years and a love that outlasts death. Marcus thought he was taking my future when he left me with nothing, but all he did was send me back to my foundation. He sent me home. This story is about finding strength when you think it's all gone, about discovering that the things that look like endings are often just the beginning of who you were always meant to be. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, I want you to share a piece of your story in the comments below. Let's build a community here, a place for people who understand what it means to fight your way back. Subscribe.
You know, thank God it's really easy to put down furniture and stuff like this in this game. If this was Animal Crossing, I think I would have crashed out. Oh my god, guys. Shakira's back. Also, hope you've been having a great day, Mr. Koenig. It's always good to see you. She had to leave because you brought up her past. Please behave. You're right. You're right. Okay, we need more planks. And... wait, I just had a great idea for right there. Wait, was she in the... I don't think Shakira was, Emma. I'm really hoping no. Hi Dinah, the house is coming along nicely. Oh, thanks, Steph. Appreciate it. Okay. I also wanted... Oh yeah. What's up, Baked Baker? How's it going? I think we need like one set of these. There we go. Oh, thanks for the likes, Baked Baker. Hopefully you're having a great day. Okay, I actually don't mind that. Cool. Perfect. We got a housemate. So, oh, hi, Wakeebs. Thanks for the heart me and the likes. Good to see you.